Hello everyone and welcome! I've been having a lot of fun lately, enjoying the RC hobby as always, especially racing around some of my smaller scale cars, though as a result I've had a few crashes, items breaking, and some maintenance being required on a few cars in the fleet. So this evening I'll be getting each car back to 100% and taking you along with me. It's my hope that on top of just simply providing you all with some entertainment, for those who build or work on cars like what I have here, you'll find this video at least somewhat informative as I work through diagnosing and repairing each car. I'm really looking forward to getting each of these cars back up and running, so let's dive right in. First up is the 2010 Ford Shelby GT500. It's been a little while now since I put this car together. I'll post a link to the build playlist below in the description if you want to learn more about this car, but in short, it's a 1/25th scale Revell model car body sitting on top of a 3D printed FFR SC1 chassis. It's a pretty basic, straightforward build that turned out looking awesome. The paint color was voted on by all of you viewers. I sometimes like to post little polls and such on the community tab here on YouTube, which is one of the perks of turning on notifications for this channel. I think it's a lot of fun for you guys to be a part of the build, and a lot of you seem to enjoy it as well, and so far you all have proved to have some great taste as I love this dark blue color. It's pretty close to Kona blue offered on the real cars, or at least as close as you're going to get just from a Rust-Oleum rattle can, and I really couldn't be happier with the result. The reason for this car being on the bench tonight, aside from the ripped tire which obviously needs to be replaced, is for the first time in my modeling/RC career, I straight up dropped a car on the floor. This is like the RC model car equivalent of not properly tying down your car in a trailer and having it go on a little unplanned road trip. Fortunately, not much damage to speak of. It did knock out the rear window, and it looks like it maybe separated the windshield in a few spots. But after it happened, I just placed the rear window in without using any glue, and right now it's staying, so I'll just leave it as it is until it falls out. That problem sort of fixed itself, which is cool, so I went ahead and changed the front left tire, and since I was having some issues with the tires sliding on the wheels, I used a little water washable school glue to help keep each tire on the wheel. There are of course a lot of other glues that you could use, but for these small scale model cars, I really like to use a little of this washable school glue. It helps hold the tires and the wheel nuts on without making them a real pain to remove. On cars this small and with a lot of little details, you don't really want to have to put a lot of muscle into getting these parts loose. At that point you're just asking for something to break. But as you can see, I got all four wheels on and tires glued. Speaking of gluing, the last thing that I needed to do was glue the right-hand side headlight lens into place, which fell out when the car hit the floor and wasn't easy to find, but fortunately it did turn up. I of course wanted to use a clear drying glue, so the glue required to hold this piece in place won't be visible once dry. You can see it shows up white here, but after it's dry, it looks much better. Everything on the chassis felt fine, but of course to really know if the car is alright, I plugged in a battery, tested everything out, and took the car for a test drive. Thankfully the car is working great, so despite a fall, not much needed done on the GT500, so let's move on to the next car. Next up is another GT500, though this one is a 1968 model. This is one of my more recent builds. The body was already built, and I've yet to really make any changes to it. The real focus of this car is the all-new 3D printable front suspension and steering assembly. Now if you're watching this video right when it comes out, we're getting very close to releasing these files. In fact, the first version is ready. We've just got to finish up some illustrations and assembly tutorial videos, as well as compile a list of where to get each of the parts that can't be 3D printed. There's not really much point in releasing the files without that other stuff to go with it, but stay tuned as we are getting close. Now this car has been sort of a test bed for this new assembly, and I've been driving this car a lot, but actually the reason that it's on the bench tonight has to do with the rear. It's completely locked up. The rear axle does not want to turn at all. I pulled this rear axle from the rejects parts pile as I often do for personal projects, and it seemed just fine and it worked just fine for hours of driving. But of course, just when the thought of why this axle was in the rejects pile popped into my head, the rear end started to sound a little crunchy. I did the right thing and just ignored it and drove the car hours more, but after a few rounds of swapping different wheels to test different tires, the rear axle completely seized up. At this point, clearly I need to remove the axle from the car and take it apart. Now at first I thought the issue might have been that I broke one of the wheel mounts loose when swapping the wheels, which can cause this issue, but both wheel mounts are solid, so I knew it's something with the gears. Sure enough, the ring gear was not solidly attached to the axle, causing it to bind up. The solution, of course, is to get the ring gear and pinion correctly lined up, and then glue the ring gear into place. If you really want to do it right, you should probably use a little alcohol to get rid of every last speck of grease to have a nice clean surface to glue to, but I wiped it up pretty good, so it should hold. I cleaned everything up and fortunately all the teeth looked just fine on the ring gear, but the pinion was pretty chewed up and needed to be replaced. Fortunately, the pinion gear was the only part that I needed to change. Once I got the rear end put back together, everything worked exactly as it should. While I was here, I replaced the rear springs to eliminate some of the bounce from the rear end. I glued a slightly softer spring and harder spring together to sort of make it a dual rate spring. I'll still tinker with it some more, but it is definitely an improvement over what I had previously. It's always a good idea to let the glue on the ring gear dry overnight, or longer is even better. But I'm impatient, so let's do some hard accelerations from a standstill. The car works great, no more locked up axles, so it's time to move on to the next car. So I don't think this car really needs any introduction. Although the General has been having a bit of a tough week, we've been testing different breakable materials to use for the big barn jump, and it's taken its toll just a bit. First, the push bar fell off. Again. I actually had to straighten it back out as it got pretty bent up in the last crash. I did glue it back on using more glue than ever. No idea how long it's going to stay on, but we'll see. I was surprised how well the car handled the jumps, with no major repairs being necessary. However, smashing the car through some wafer cookies would prove to be a bit too much for the rear driveshaft end, which needed to be replaced. This car has bigger issues though. When it came time to test braking through the fence, I couldn't keep the car going in a straight line. Part of it might have been all of the bumps on the concrete, but also look at the steering play. That's not good. Even by 69 Charger standards, that's a lot of play in the steering. Now I'm well aware that the tree that bends doesn't break. Or in other words, I want the steering to have some give when landing a jump or smashing through something, rather than it being super rigid and breaking parts every time. I identified the main sources of the play, which were the top end of the right knuckle inside of the bearing and the steering arm. I eliminated the play with the steering arm by just gluing it to the knuckle. This made things better, but there is still some play. I got the battery installed and took the car over to the track. Now it tracks pretty straight and seems okay, but I have a feeling the concrete may be a big factor in why the car is swerving all over. I'm probably going to need to focus on the track surface just as much as the steering, but for now I'm satisfied with how the car is, and I'm looking forward to doing some more testing. Stay tuned for that in an upcoming video. Last but certainly not least, I've got the Partspin 1969 Camaro. This was another fun build since this car was sort of built by all of you viewers. I had polls for everything from the motor to the paint and the wheels, and whatever got the most votes was what I did. The result looks awesome, and once again I'll be sure to leave a playlist for this build below in the description. Eventually I'll be getting around to messing with the suspension and front camber angle, which both need to be adjusted, but I've been driving and enjoying this car as is, and right now there's one thing that's keeping this car from running, and that's the motor shaft is spinning inside of the gear. Unlike some other motor shafts, this one is completely round, so basically you need a really tight press fit gear or to use glue. Now you could make a flat spot on the shaft, but since the shaft and motor gets pretty hot, over time it tends to soften the plastic and rotate inside. Metal gears could help, but they would be expensive to have made. Maybe there's a higher temp plastic or resin that could be used, but for now I decided to simply install a new gear since the old one had already been re-glued before. I sanded the shaft with some coarse sandpaper and used a wire wheel to roughen the surface to maybe give the glue a little more bite. Also, I made sure to get the gears spaced properly so there is as little resistance in the drivetrain as possible, which will help as well. Again, the glue should be allowed plenty of time to dry, but I couldn't resist doing a quick test drive. This is such a fun car to drive with that big RF130 motor and great looking Camaro body. So far it's doing great, we'll see how long it lasts. Well, the evening has come to an end and I'd say mission accomplished. Every car is back in working order and ready to hit the track once again. If you're hungry for more RC content, check out the playlists below in the description for each one of these cars that you've seen here, and stay tuned for more videos coming to the channel soon. I want to thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.